If one day you returned to your own home and found the woman who used to be just a maid, holding your children in her arms, telling them about love and family, what would you do, Graham Ashford, a cold billionaire who once believed that money could buy everything, left his world alone, then one day returned without warning. But what he saw was not betrayal, but something that brought his heart to its knees. A simple woman, a home filled with laughter, and 3 children who had never known a father. He stood there, not knowing whether to be angry or grateful. If it were you, what would you choose? Forgive or continue living within the walls of pride and loss? Do you dare to believe that sometimes a stranger can teach us how to love ourselves again? Join me as I enter the story, where a man learns to let go, and a woman quietly uses her heart to heal 3 little souls, and his. If you believe that love can be found even in the midst of brokenness, please like, share, and subscribe to Frontier Hearts to start this journey with me. It had been raining on Willow Creek for 3 hours. The rain was so heavy that the dirt road leading to the Ashford estate had turned into a dark, muddy mess. The black SUV stopped under the wooden porch, its headlights casting a golden glow on the rusty silver of the fence. The door opened, and Graham Ashford stepped out. His suit was still neatly pressed, but his black shoes were muddy. He took a deep breath. The Montana spring air smelled of earth and damp grass. He had lived in New York for the past 6 months, in a cold 54th floor apartment overlooking the Hudson River. Everything there was clean, neat, but empty. Here, there was a smell of memory. Graham looked around. No one knew he was coming home today. His flight had been diverted because of a meeting delay. He figured he would come home quietly, hug his kids, and tell them in the morning. But the laughter coming from the backyard made him stop. Not the familiar crying, not the screams of children, but a clear laugh. He slowed, his shoes sinking into the mud. Through the low fence, he saw the triplets, Ellie, Sam, and June, rolling around in the mud. They were all wearing T-shirts, their arms and legs dirty, their faces smeared. And the woman crouching beside them, Elena Carter, was laughing. She scooped up mud and drew circles on their cheeks like she was playing with face paint. In Graham's eyes, the scene was a nightmare. He rushed out of the shadows, his boots clattering on the puddle. "What are you doing?" His voice was low and sharp, drowning out the sound of the rain. The 3 children jumped. Ellie stood up in panic, mud slipping from her small hands. Sam hid behind Elena, and June burst into tears. Elena turned back. Her dark brown hair was wet from the rain. Her shirt was soaked, but her eyes were strangely calm. She spoke softly, almost in a whisper. "They are just playing." "Sir, play Graham." Choked, in the mud, in the rain. "What do you think this is, a summer camp?" He took Ellie's hand and wiped her face with a handkerchief. The smell of mud mixed with rain made him sick. 6 months away. He had thought the worst thing would be the lack of laughter in the house. But no, worse was when there was laughter, and he felt alienated. "Elena Carter," he said, his voice cold. "You are fired. Immediately." She was silent for a few seconds. The rain continued to fall. Her wet hair stuck to her neck. Then she answered softly, her voice as soft as before. "If that is what you wish." She bent down and picked June up. The child was still sobbing, clutching her collar. Elena cooed, "Shh, it's okay, baby." The way she held the child, Graham realized, was not like a servant. It was like someone who truly loved her, but reason made him push it aside. He turned and walked quickly toward the porch. The sound of rain hitting the tin roof mixed with the sound of the door opening. The living room was brightly lit with yellow lights, everything neat as if no one had ever left. The picture of Laura, his wife, was still hanging in the same place, in the middle of the fireplace. Her eyes in the picture still looked at him gently as ever. He sat down on the chair, head in hands, sweat and rain mixed together. The question echoed in his mind. Why did she do that? How can she laugh in all that mud? There was a soft knock on the door. It was Mrs. Nora, the family's faithful old housekeeper. Sir, Miss Elena only does what the children need. Need? Graham looked up, his voice harsh. They need discipline, not mud. Mrs. Nora sighed softly. No, sir. They need to laugh. She's the first one who's made them laugh since Madame died. The words made him fall silent. Outside, the rain was slowing down. His laughter still echoed somewhere in his head, mixed with June's sobs, making his chest feel heavy. He stepped out onto the porch and looked toward the end of the garden. Elena was packing her clothes in an old suitcase. She turned when she saw him. Their eyes met for a moment. There was no anger, no fear, just a quiet and sad look. As she passed him, Graham heard her voice, so soft it was almost drowned out by the rain. They haven't laughed since their mother died. The gate closed. There was only the sound of rain falling on the wooden porch, and a man stood still, his hand still clutching a muddy handkerchief. For the first time in months, he didn't know if he was right or wrong, and for the first time, the laughter of the 3 children made his heart ache. The sky over Willow Creek the next morning was covered with a thin layer of fog. The rain of the previous night had washed away the dust, but it could not erase the heaviness in the Ashford mansion. Graham woke early. He walked down the wooden stairs, where morning light filtered through the wide glass doors onto the polished floor. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, but he felt no warmth. From the kitchen came the soft clink of dishes. Mrs. Nora was pouring coffee into a cup. Beside her was an old brown suitcase placed neatly against the wall. She hasn't left yet, Graham asked, his voice hoarse, as if he were not yet fully awake. Mrs. Nora did not look at him, just answered softly. Miss Elena got up at dawn. She said she would leave when the rain cleared. She wanted to say goodbye to the children one last time. He was silent. Those words did not comfort him. For some reason, just hearing that she was leaving made him feel an indescribable void in his chest. Small footsteps sounded behind him. It was Ellie. She was clutching her old doll, her eyes red. Daddy, is Elena really leaving? Graham looked at his daughter, his heart sinking. She needs to come home. Honey, but she said she was going to teach us how to bake today, Ellie said softly, her voice cracking. She said she wouldn't let us down again. Graham bent down and gently stroked his son's head. Someone else will teach you later. Now go to your room and change. Okay. The little girl nodded and turned away. Her small footsteps echoed on the stairs, like a slow beat in his heart. He turned around, about to pick up his coffee, when his eyes fell on the cream-colored envelope lying on the table. It was wet in one corner, as if it had been caught in the rain. In a familiar, soft handwriting, it read, "To Graham." He recognized the handwriting at once. It was his wife Laura's, Mrs. Nora quickly said Miss Elena dropped it last night when she was packing. I thought you should see it. Graham's hand shook as he opened the envelope. The smell of old paper and perfume wafted through, like a memory resurfacing. Inside was a letter. handwritten, the date in the right corner being June, the year before Laura died. Dear Graham, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you. I want you to know about Elena Carter. She is not just a stranger. She is my half-sister. I found her last year, after years of hiding from my mother. She lived a humble life, but had a good heart. I was afraid you wouldn't understand, so I didn't tell you. If she ever comes into your life, please look at her the same way you looked at me, without judgment. Because sometimes God sends us people to remind us that kindness still exists. The last line was blurred, as if tears had fallen on it. Graham sat in silence for a long time. His hands were crumpling the letter, his heart pounding in his chest. The images in his mind came back. Elena's calm eyes, the way she held the children, her smile in the rain, all mingled with Laura's voice in his memory. Mrs. Nora spoke softly. Madam wrote that letter before entering the hospital. She said, if one day you lose faith, let Elena stay, because she is the remnant of Madam's kindness left behind. Graham stood up without a word. He walked quickly to the door, his black shoes making prints on the wet tile. On the porch, Elena was bent over, dragging a suitcase. She was wearing a light coat, her hair tied back. 3 children stood nearby, their eyes brimming with tears. Elena, his voice rang out, making her stop. She turned back. He held up the letter, his eyes complicated. Why didn't you say so? He asked. His voice choked. Elena was silent for a moment. Then she answered, her voice low but clear. Because I know you are not ready to believe, and I don't want to be here just out of pity. Graham looked at her for a long time. There was no resentment in her words, only a calmness that confused him. You know who I am. You know I can change everything with just a word. Aren't you afraid? She smiled, as light as a breath. No one can change the truth, no matter how powerful they are. Graham clenched his fists. He couldn't find the words to reply. Mrs. Nora stepped out and interjected softly. You should let her stay at least until a replacement is found. The children will have a hard time coping with another separation. Elena looked at her gratefully, then at Graham. If that's what you want, I'll stay, but only until I find someone else. He nodded, almost without thinking. A cold wind blew through the yard, carrying the scent of damp earth and lavender from Laura's flower bed. Elena bent down and stroked June's hair. The girl stopped crying and held her hand. When they all went back inside, Graham was still standing there, alone in the empty courtyard. Laura's letter in his hand was now crumpled, the ink seeping into his palm. He looked up at the room where Laura used to read. The window was ajar. The breeze parted the curtain, revealing a framed family photograph. Him and her, with 3 children. Someone once said, every crack lets in light, but what light can pass through a heart that remains closed that night? Graham sat in his study. The desk lamp cast a shadow over his tired face. On the table, the letter lay open beside a framed photograph of Laura. He turned back to the last line and read softly, Kindness remains. Outside, the wind blew through the garden, touching the trembling lavender petals. Upstairs, the soft laughter of children drifted down. The laughter wasn't loud, but it was so real that he closed his eyes, and for the first time, he felt his heart feel less empty. Tuesday mornings in Willow Creek were unusually quiet. Weak sunlight filtered through the birch trees on the porch and onto the damp ground. In the large kitchen of the Ashford mansion, the sound of a wooden spoon stirring a pot of soup mingled with the aroma of fresh-baked bread. Elena stood by the stove, her white shirt neat, her hair tied low. The three children sat around the dining table, their eyes following her, as if afraid that if they blinked, she would disappear again. "Miss Elena, you're not going anywhere today, are you?" Sam asked, his voice slurred. She smiled. "No, I'm here today, but only if you promise to finish your breakfast." Ellie cheered, and June laughed, nodding so hard she dropped her spoon. Their laughter filled the room, like soft music that soothed everything. Graham entered, adjusting his shirt collar. He paused in the doorway, taking in the sight before him, Elena bending down to tie June's shoelaces, her eyes gentle, her hands deft. Somehow, it reminded him of Laura, but not of pain, but of a rare warmth. He stepped back, his voice low. "Thanks for staying." Elena looked up. "I just did what needed to be done." Graham sat down across from her. In the dim morning light, his face looked tired, but calm. He looked at her, then at the children. "I've read Laura's letter over and over again. She always knows what's right." Elena smiled slightly, but said nothing. Graham saw a distant look in her eyes. She didn't seek recognition, just worked quietly, as if the work itself was what kept her balanced. "Mrs." Nora came in, put another bottle of milk on the table, and said softly, "Maybe we should all go out into the garden today. The babies need some sunshine." At noon, the whole family went to the backyard. The ground was soft. The smell of fresh grass and lavender wafted in the air. Elena spread a large blanket on the grass and laid out sandwiches and apple juice. Graham sat not far away, watching the three children run around the garden, their laughter echoing through the wind. "Have you ever had a family, Elena?" he asked softly. She paused, looking up at him. "No. I grew up with my mother, in a small apartment in Denver. She died early. I worked to get an education and support myself." Graham was silent. Her voice was calm, but there was a trace of sadness in her eyes. He looked at her hands, small fingers calloused from work. "Laura once said," he hesitated, "that she had a way of making people feel worthy of love." Elena bowed her head slightly, her voice as light as the wind. "She probably just said that to encourage you." Graham was about to say something, but he stopped when Ellie ran up and hugged Elena tightly. "I drew you, Auntie." On the small piece of paper was a picture of a smiling teacher surrounded by lavender flowers, with three children holding hands beside her. In the corner, Ellie had scribbled, "My family." Elena looked at the drawing, her eyes welling up with tears. She didn't want to cry, but her voice was hoarse. "It's beautiful. Ellie." Graham saw that moment. He turned away, but he could not hide his emotion. Since Laura's death, he had tried to teach the children to smile, but it had never worked. Just a few days with Elena, and they had changed. In the afternoon, while the children were napping, Elena went out to water the plants in the garden. Graham stood on the porch and watched. The sunlight slanted over her shoulders, the gold reflecting off her brown hair. There was something strange about the feeling, both near and far, both comforting and frightening. He stepped closer, stopping a few feet away from her. "Are you mad at me?" Elena turned back slightly. "Because of the rainy night?" He nodded. She shook her head. "No. When someone loses the most precious thing, they try to control everything else, for fear of losing more. I understand that." The sentence made him stunned. She understood him too well. "Elena," he said softly, "I don't want you to feel forced. If you want to go, I won't stop you. She put down the watering can and turned to look at him. "I'm not here for pity. I'm here for the children. They need to be loved, the real way." He nodded, but his eyes were still confused. There was a thin line between them, enough to understand, enough to be afraid to go further. That night, Graham couldn't sleep. He walked past the living room and saw a faint light coming from the piano room. He opened the door and saw Elena sitting at the piano. She didn't play, just placed her hands on the keys and closed her eyes. "I miss her," she said without turning around. "Laura taught me this song. To light again," she said. "If I ever feel lost, play it to find my way back." Graham sat down on the chair beside her. The yellow light fell on her face, gentle and sad. He said softly, "Laura used to play this piece on sleepless nights. Yours sounds exactly like it." Elena smiled slightly, then began to play the keys. The sound of the piano rang out, slow and clear, like raindrops falling into the heart. Graham closed his eyes, and all the images came flooding back. The funeral, the empty room, the letter Laura left behind. And now Elena, sitting before him, not the past, but the present. When the music ended, the room fell silent. "Have you ever thought," Elena said softly, "that pain is not meant to be forgotten, but to remind us to cherish what remains?" Graham opened his eyes and looked at her for a long moment. He didn't know how to respond. But in that moment, he knew one thing. He no longer felt completely alone. That night, when he returned to his room, he sat in front of the window, looking out at the moonlit garden. For the first time in 2 years, he blew the dust off the family photo, cleaned the glass, and placed it on the desk. Outside, the night wind carried the scent of lavender, Laura's familiar scent, now mixed with the scent of Elena's hair that lingered on his hand when he accidentally touched it. He understood that some pains do not go away, but only become lighter when shared. And sometimes, healing comes in the most unexpected form. The atmosphere at Ashford Manor changed slowly over the next week, like a piece of music being retuned note by note. Graham still worked, but he no longer locked himself in his study. He spent time eating breakfast with the children, and sometimes his eyes lingered on Elena's face longer than necessary. On Saturday morning, the early sunlight poured through the kitchen window, spreading soft streaks of light on the wooden floor. Elena was arranging lavender flowers in a glass vase, her movements gentle and deft. "Laura likes these flowers," Graham said as he entered. His voice was low, but had lost its heaviness. Elena smiled, not looking up. "I know. She says the scent of lavender is soothing." He looked at her intently. "And you? How does it make you feel?" She raised her head slightly, her eyes glinting in the sunlight. "It reminds me of peace, even if it is just for a moment." Graham was silent. He knew it better than anyone. Peace, to him, was a luxury. In the afternoon, Elena took the children out into the garden. They eagerly brought brooms, shovels, and seeds. She taught them to plant lavender seeds in the new bed of soil, right next to the white picket fence. "This will be the new garden," she said, "where all sadness can sleep." Ellie tilted her head and asked, "Will Miss Elena stay here forever?" The question made her pause for a second. She smiled and patted the child's head. "As long as you need me, I'll be here." Graham stood at a distance, watching the scene, feeling both warm and uneasy. He realized that Elena had not only brought the children back to life, but also made him face his true self, a father who had run away from emotions, from loss. That evening, after the children were asleep, Graham invited Elena to sit on the wooden porch, where the breeze gently stirred the lavender. The sky was full of stars, the moonlight reflected off the roof tiles, and the glasses of red wine. "Have you ever thought," he began, "that sometimes people are not afraid of losing someone, but of losing themselves when that person is gone?" Elena looked at him, her eyes soft but understanding. "I think we don't really lose anyone. We just hold them in a different form. The question is, are we willing to open ourselves to see that?" He smiled slightly, a rare smile. "You sound like a therapist." "No." She shook her head. "I just lived with pain for so long. I learned there are two ways to live. Either let it consume you, or learn to listen to it." The words left him speechless. Perhaps that was why she made him feel at peace. Not because she was like Laura, but because she taught him how to face the darkness without fear. A gentle breeze blew by. A lavender petal fell on the table and touched his hand. He held it and asked softly, "Have you ever regretted coming here?" "No," she replied softly. "If I hadn't come, I would never have known. Sometimes the most beautiful things come from broken things." They sat in silence for a long time. The wind carried the scent of orchids, and the crickets chirped softly on the porch. No one said anything, but they both knew something was shifting inside, slowly but surely. The next day, Graham had to go into town to meet with shareholders. The meeting lasted almost all day, and the old pressures returned revenue charts, contracts, and questions about the company's image. A familiar voice rang out in the room. "Mr. Ashford, there are rumors that you are getting too close to the new Maid." Graham looked up. It was Victoria Dane, his PR director and former partner. She smiled thinly, but her eyes were calculating. "Rumors," Graham replied, his voice calm. "I don't run a company on rumors." Victoria tilted her head. "Even so, your personal image is tied to the brand. A small scandal could send your stock plummeting." He looked at her for a long time, his eyes cold. If the truth makes someone uncomfortable, then the problem is not the truth. The room was silent. When the meeting ended, Victoria approached, her voice low but full of meaning. "Be careful, Graham. The world is not forgiving of sentimental stories." He didn't reply, but as he drove home, her words echoed in his head. He wasn't afraid of gossip. He was afraid it would hurt Elena, who had done nothing wrong. It was dusk when he returned to the villa. From a distance, he saw the yellow light coming from the garden. Elena was reading a story to the children. All three of them huddled around her, their eyes focused. Her voice was deep and warm, occasionally breaking into giggles. He stopped at the gate, not going in. He wanted to keep that image, like a beautiful piece of film that he was afraid to break if he touched it. Elena looked up and saw him. She smiled slightly. "You're back. The children just finished their last story. What's the matter?" "The story of the bird that never left the nest, even though it knew how to fly." He chuckled. "Same with me. Right." She looked at him, her eyes quiet but warm. "No, you just haven't realized that you have another pair of wings." He didn't know how to respond. In that moment, the scent of lavender drifted between them, like a sweet memory. Night fell, after the children were asleep. Elena walked across the hall and saw Graham still sitting on the porch, looking out at the garden. She approached. "Can't you sleep?" "No. I was thinking about the things I lost. Sometimes," she said, "you don't really lose. You just don't dare look back." He turned around, his voice low. What about you? Is there anything you don't dare to look back on?" She was silent for a few seconds, then replied, "Yes. It was the moment I left Laura when she called. I was afraid to see her weaken, afraid to face the loss before it came. And when she really left, I didn't have a chance to say sorry." Her voice trembled slightly, but her eyes remained steady. "Laura doesn't blame you," Graham said softly. "She knows you did the best you could." She looked at him and nodded slightly. "I hope so." "Before leaving," she added, her voice almost whispering, "there are pains that don't need to be erased. They just need someone to walk through them with." Graham sat there for a long time. A lavender petal had fallen from the table and lay quietly beside his wine glass. Outside, the wind still carried the faint scent of the flower. He raised his head, looked up at the sky, and for the first time in 2 years, he smiled. 3 days after the meeting in the city, the rumor spread like wildfire. Headlines began to appear on social media. Billionaire Graham Ashford caught getting intimate with Maid in his mansion. Wife still not over. Husband has a new girlfriend, Graham found out on Monday morning. He had just poured himself a cup of coffee when the phone on his desk began to vibrate. Messages from his assistant, from the board, from an old acquaintance, all saying the same thing. He flipped open his phone, his eyes turning cold as he saw the photos. Elena was leading the children through the local market. She was bending down to tie Sam's shoelaces, and he was standing behind them, smiling at them. The angle made everything ambiguous, as if they were in an intimate relationship. Below were thousands of comments, most of them malicious. "Rich is just like that." "Maids? How ridiculous. All men are the same." He put the phone down, feeling a mixture of anger and helplessness. In his life, he could deal with enemies, with business, with political attacks. But he didn't know what to do when the one who was hurt was Elena, someone who had never hurt anyone. Elena entered the room, saw his expression, and stopped. What happened? He was silent for a moment, then handed her the phone. She read it, her face gradually turning pale. Her eyes flashed with hurt, but no panic. "I understand," she said softly. "I'll pack up and leave now. I don't want to get you into trouble." "No," Graham said quickly, his voice hard. "You did nothing wrong. You don't have to go, but you will lose credibility. Your company. I may lose my company, but I won't let anyone hurt my family." The words came out before he could think. Elena looked at him, her eyes wavering. "Someone from your family." Graham realized what he had said, but didn't take it back. "Yes, you're one of us, at least until I say otherwise." She bowed her head, hiding her emotions, her voice still as light as the wind. "Thank you. But sometimes, kindness isn't enough to stop people from judging." That day, a few reporters began to appear in front of the villa gate. They set up their cameras and stood patiently waiting like dark shadows. The children did not understand what was happening, only feeling strange, when Mrs. Nora stopped them from going out to play. As night fell, Graham stood by his study window, watching the lights outside the gate. The flickering light reflected off his face, a mix of exhaustion and determination. Elena knocked on the door and entered, a cup of tea in her hand. "You haven't had dinner yet." He turned back, his gaze softening. "Thank you. You don't need to worry about me." "I don't care," she replied, setting down her teacup. "I just think sometimes you need a cup of tea to remember you're still alive." He chuckled. "You always have an answer for everything." "No. I just listen." They were both silent for a moment. Outside, The wind gently tapped against the glass window. "Are you scared?" Graham asked, his voice low. "What they say? What's going on out there?" She shook her head. "No, I've been judged all my life. Because of circumstances, because of work, because they thought I wasn't good enough. Now, I just feel sad for people who never learned to see with their hearts." Graham looked at her for a long time. He realized that while he was fighting the public opinion, she was calm in the storm. Her composure was admirable. The next day, the rumor was pushed further. A major news site published a story claiming that Elena had been Graham's ex-lover before Laura died. The article went viral, along with a host of sinister theories. The company's stock began to fall. The board asked Graham to take a temporary leave of absence from public life. Victoria Dane tactfully advised, "You should issue a press release denying her and terminate your contract with her. If you don't blame me for not being able to protect you." Graham understood Victoria was trying to corner him. He responded with a short text message. "I don't need to be protected from the truth." That afternoon, he returned home. The atmosphere in the villa was heavy. Elena was tidying up the books in the children's room. When he entered, she stopped. "I know things have gone too far," she said, "and I don't want to be the reason the kids get looked down upon. I should leave." Graham stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "If you leave now, they will win, and I will lose the last of my faith in goodness." Elena looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "You are fighting the world, and I am just a nameless woman. Don't lose what you have built because of me. You think I fear losing the company more than losing myself." He took another step forward. His voice choked. "You made me remember who I am. Elena, you made the children laugh. You made this house come alive. You call that just a woman?" She turned away, tears rolling down her cheeks. "You don't understand. They won't stop. Then let them come." Elena was about to say more, but Sam suddenly ran in and hugged her leg. "Miss, they are outside the gate taking our picture." Elena bent down and coaxed the child, her voice trembling. "It's okay. Sam, come inside." Graham watched the scene, his hands clenched. He walked quickly to the door. Outside, 3 reporters were trying to climb over the fence to take pictures. Graham walked straight over, his voice as cold as ice. "Leave here, immediately. This is a private residence. If I see anyone else here, I will sue them all." One of them still tried to say, "Do you have any comments about the relationship between you and Miss Carter?" He looked straight into the camera. "She is the only one in this house whose heart you don't understand." That statement went viral that night. People cut the clip, shared it, and discussed it. Some were mocking, some were moved. But strangely, amid the thousands of harsh comments, other comments began to appear. At least he dares to protect the person he loves. Maybe this time, the rumors are not like usual. She looks so gentle and genuine. In the darkness of public opinion, a small light began to flicker. As night fell, Elena went out into the garden. The wind blew through the newly planted lavender beds, carrying with it a sweet scent. Graham stepped out behind her and stood beside her. "Rumor cannot kill the truth," he said hoarsely. "It only tests whether we dare to believe in the truth." Elena looked at him, the moonlight reflecting in her eyes. "I'm just afraid the right thing sometimes comes too late." He replied softly, "It's never too late, if there's still someone willing to believe." The two stood still, the wind blowing gently, the scent of lavender lingering around them, light but lasting. The storm of rumors had not yet subsided, but the Ashford house was slowly regaining its rhythm. Elena still taught the children songs, planted trees, and read stories every night. Yet no one could deny that something invisible was surrounding the mansion, like the cold wind before a storm. That afternoon, Graham returned from an emergency meeting. He was tired. His shirt collar was damp with sweat. His eyes were deep. He had just learned that one of the company's largest branches had suddenly withdrawn capital. The person behind this deal, none other than Victoria Dane. He knew this was a warning shot. But what angered him most was that Victoria didn't stop at the company. That night, as he and Elena prepared dinner for the children, her phone rang. An anonymous text message appeared. "Do you think you can win his favor and replace his dead wife? Leave before it's too late." Elena stared at the screen silently for a few seconds, then hung up. She didn't say anything to Graham, just tried to hide the trembling in her hands. But Graham's eyes were sharp enough to see. "What's going on?" She shook her head slightly. "It's nothing. I don't want to worry you anymore. Don't lie to me. Elena." His voice was low. She was silent for a moment, then sighed and put the phone on the table. "Just a few threats. I'm used to it." Graham clenched his fists. "No one has the right to threaten you. I will find out who did this." She looked at him, her voice soft and firm. "You can't protect everything with strength. Graham, sometimes what you need to do is hold on to your heart." He did not reply, but his eyes were determined. "I may not be able to protect the world, but I will protect what belongs to me." Night had fallen, and the children were fast asleep. Elena went out into the garden, where the moonlight stretched across the growing lavender beds. She sat on a wooden bench, hugging her knees, looking toward the lighted house. Inside, Graham was still working late, his shadow cast against the window lonely and hard. A slight sound made her look up. The wind was light, but a faint scent of smoke lingered in the air. She frowned. Turning to look at the shed at the edge of the garden, a strange light was flickering. Elena stood up and walked faster. As she got closer, she noticed smoke rising from inside. "Oh my God!" she cried softly. A small fire was spreading along the fuel tanks. There were many flammable materials in the warehouse: paper, oil, cloth. She rushed to pull open the door, intending to find a hose to put out the fire, but it was locked. She ran back into the house, screaming, "Graham, it's on fire!" Her voice rang out, and Graham rushed out of the study. He and Mrs. Nora ran downstairs. "Where are the children?" "Sleeping upstairs." Elena gasped, pointing toward the warehouse. "The fire started there." Graham glanced outside. The fire reflected red into the night sky. He called the guard and ran into the house. Up the stairs. "Where are you going?" Elena called after him. "Go get the kids down." She rushed after. Smoke began to fill the hallway, the smell stinging my eyes. The pillars were cracking. In the small room, 3 children were huddled together, coughing. Elena rushed in, pulling the wet blanket over their heads. "Follow me." Graham carried June, and Elena led Ellie and Sam. Halfway down the stairs, part of the ceiling collapsed. Fire broke out, blocking the way out. "This way is blocked," Elena shouted. Graham turned, peering through the smoke. "Back door," through the kitchen. They rushed into the back hall, where flames were already starting to burn through the curtains. Graham struggled to open the kitchen door, then grabbed the children and ran out, while Elena struggled to drag along the suitcase containing important papers. As soon as they reached the yard, an explosion was heard from the warehouse. A thick plume of smoke billowed into the sky, and flames spread to the nearby electric wire. Elena Graham shouted. She was still near the back door, coughing. He ran back, ignoring the heat. She tried to push the suitcase away, but the smoke made her dizzy. He rushed forward, pulled her away from the flames, and held her close to his chest. "Are you okay?" She shook her head, coughing. "Are the children?" "Safe. Okay. Everything is fine." She nodded slightly, then passed out in his arms. Graham carried her away from the flames and laid her down on the grass. The fire department arrived shortly afterward, its sirens blaring throughout the neighborhood. When the fire was out, he was still sitting beside Elena, his hand clasped tightly in hers. Mrs. Nora and the children stood nearby, shivering but safe. A policeman came up. "Mr. Ashford, we checked. It was no accident. There were traces of flammable material in the fuel tank." Graham looked up, his eyes cold. "Who did it? We are investigating." "But—" The police officer held up a burnt piece of paper, bearing the logo of Dane Media, Victoria Dane's company. Graham held the paper, his hands clenched until they turned white. As the ambulance took Elena away, he followed. All the while, he just looked at her face, her hair sticky with smoke, her lips pale but strangely peaceful. At the hospital, the doctor said she had minor burns and smoke inhalation and needed a few days of rest. Graham sat by the bed, saying nothing. He held her hand, feeling the faint warmth that remained. She opened her eyes after a few hours, her voice weak and hoarse. "You shouldn't have come back. I thought you were going to run away." He chuckled, his voice choked. "I used to run from a lot of things, Elena, but not anymore." She smiled slightly, then closed her eyes again. Graham sat there all night. Outside the pale blue light of the hospital, there was only one thing on his mind. He had lost too much, and this time he would lose no more. The next morning, the news spread Ashford Villa caught fire during the night. The maid saved 3 children from death. The article was accompanied by a photo of Graham carrying Elena out of the flames. The photo went viral, and for the first time, public opinion was silent. No more scorn. Only thousands of comments remained. She saved her family. It's rare to see such beautiful courage. Perhaps, this time, we have judged the wrong person. The fire took away part of their home, but gave them something more precious, the trust of the world. The Willow Creek Hospital sat on a small hill overlooking the valley, where smoke from the fire still lingered in the air. Elena lay in bed, the morning sunlight streaming through the glass windows onto her slender face. The smell of antiseptic and the sound of nurses' shoes echoed softly in the hallway. She opened her eyes and saw Graham sitting beside her. His shirt was stained with ash. His eyes were dark from the sleepless night. He still held her hand in his, as if he let go, it would all disappear. "You're not sleeping yet." Her voice was hoarse and weak. "No need," he said softly, then smiled. "As long as you're breathing, I don't feel tired." She chuckled, though it was mixed with a cough. "You shouldn't say things that could be easily misunderstood." "Maybe I want them to misunderstand," he replied, his voice slow but firm. Elena looked at him, her eyes deep and sad, but she did not look away. "Don't say things you can't keep, Graham. I can't bear another wound." He squeezed her hand. "This is not a rash statement. I lost Laura, and I thought my heart had died with her. But when I saw you in the flames, I realized that what I feared was not losing my reputation, but losing someone again. The room was silent. Only the steady beeping of the heart monitor could be heard. Elena turned to face the window, her voice as soft as the wind. You are mixing gratitude with pity. That feeling can easily be mistaken for love. Graham didn't answer. He just looked out, where the golden morning light was filtering through the treetops. Maybe, but I know I wouldn't want to live in that house if you weren't there. The statement was unquestionable. It was simple, yet so sincere that Elena had to turn back and look at him for a long moment. That morning, Nora brought the children in for a visit. They hugged Elena and talked excitedly about the brave firefighters and the mountain-sized house fire. Sam also brought a dried lavender flower picked from the old garden. Elena, Ellie said, when you get better, we'll replant the flowers. The burned areas are gone. Elena smiled, stroking her head. We will plant it again, even more beautiful than before. Mrs. Nora stood behind, tears in her eyes. Houses can burn, but hearts can't. Graham turned to look at her, then nodded slightly. He understood. They had lost not just a part of the mansion, but a part of their past. But perhaps that loss was the beginning of a new beginning. 3 days later, Elena was released. Graham personally drove her back to the mansion, where only the skeleton remained and the smell of old smoke. When the car stopped, she silently looked at the devastation. The grass was charred, the doorframe broken, the walls blackened with smoke, but among the ashes, a few lavender stalks still stood, raising their heads in the wind. I don't think it's still alive, she said softly. Graham smiled. Lavender has deep roots, as does the man who sowed it. She looked at him, her eyes softening. What are you going to do with this place rebuild? But not the same. He looked around. I want to open a small center for orphans or people who have lost their homes, Laura said, if possible. She would like this place to be filled with laughter. Elena was silent. What are you going to name it, Laura's Haven? He replied without hesitation. Laura's safe place. She pursed her lips, moved to the point of speechlessness. If she were still alive, she would be so proud. Graham looked at her, his voice low. She was proud, and so was I. They were silent for a moment, listening only to the wind rustling through the charred wood. Then Graham spoke, as if a decision had been made long ago. Elena, I want you to stay, not as a maid, but as a companion, someone who will help me keep my promise to Laura and keep the spirit of this house. Elena looked at him, her eyes filled with so many things. Are you asking me to stay because of your promise to her, or because of you both? He admitted, Laura once told me that if I ever met someone who made children laugh as much as she did when she was alive, I should learn to open my heart again. Elena bowed her head slightly, tears falling down her cheeks. Did she really say that to you? There was a letter she left behind. I never got around to reading it until the night of the fire. He took a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket and unfolded it. If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you. Don't be stuck in the past. Graham, you gave me the best life, and I want you to give someone else the same chance. Live. Don't just exist. His voice cracked as he finished reading. Elena was silent, tears falling. Then she said softly, She is strong, just like you. Graham shook his head. No, I'm just learning to be strong like her. That afternoon, When they took the children out into the backyard, the wind blew gently through the ashes. Elena sat down, her hands covered in dirt, and began to replant the lavender seeds. The children helped her innocently, while Graham stood behind and watched, his eyes sparkling with a light he thought had been lost forever. As the sun set behind the mountains, he walked up to her and asked softly, "Do you believe something can grow from the ashes?" She looked up, smiling slightly. "If it was planted with love, it will surely bloom again, but sometimes it will take a different form." Graham nodded, looking at the children playing. "Perhaps that other form is us." It was dusk. Elena sat leaning against the porch steps, her hair dusty, her hands muddy, but her eyes unusually bright. Graham watched the scene, a feeling both familiar and new in his heart. It's no longer gratitude or obligation. It's something deeper, the feeling that makes people want to stay, want to believe, want to rebuild their lives with someone from the smallest bricks. As night fell, the scent of dried lavender wafted through the courtyard. Elena looked up at the starry sky and said softly, "Perhaps there is room for new seeds in the ashes." Graham was silent, then put his hand on her shoulder. "And I want to plant them with you." 2 weeks after the fire, the front garden of the Ashford house was tidied up. The charred timbers had been replaced with new beds of soil. Children played among the young lavender, while the sounds of hammering and sawing echoed from the back of the house, the sounds of beginnings. Elena recovered. She and Nora sorted through the salvaged items. The family photos were cleaned and placed back on the small table in the living room. In the afternoon, as the sunlight slanted through the window, Nora opened an old wooden box. Inside were a few notebooks, some jewelry, and a small, sealed, yellow envelope. She was silent for a few seconds, then said softly, "Miss Elena, I think this is for you." Elena looked up. "What is it, Mrs.?" Nora handed over the envelope. "Before Lady Laura died, she sent me a little box with instructions to give it to me, when I thought it was time. I think now is the time." Elena looked at the envelope. Her heart stopped. The handwriting on the outside was soft and slightly tilted. It was her sister's. The simple words, "To my dear sister, Elena." She sat down on a chair and opened the envelope with trembling hands. It was a carefully folded letter, and inside were some old photographs, 2 little girls in white dresses, holding hands on the grass. She recognized one of them as herself and the other as Laura, when they were both about 8 years old. The letter was handwritten in purple ink, with some tear stains. "Dear Elena, if you're reading this, it means I no longer have the chance to tell you this in person. I've kept the truth from you, not because I'm afraid, but because I want you to live in peace. You're not just my sister. You're the child Graham and I adopted when your mother died. But because of the law and the complexities of her family, I couldn't tell you. You always thought of me as your half-sister. But in fact, we only have one mother, and your father is the one who left my mother before you were born. I know this may hurt you, but I want you to understand you'll never be an outsider in this family. When I knew I didn't have much time left, I told Graham that if you ever came back, he would welcome you as I did, with all his love. And if, somehow, feelings developed between you two, don't be afraid, because true love knows no boundaries. Past, only knowing kindness and faith. You have brought me warm days, and I believe you will bring Graham a peaceful life. Love you forever. Laura." Elena dropped the letter, her hand shaking. Her tears fell onto the page, mingling with the old water drops. "No way," she whispered. "You adopted me. Mrs." Nora nodded. Her voice choked. "I've known for a long time. Lady Laura didn't want to tell you because she was afraid you would feel guilty, or that people would look at you differently. She always saw you as her real sister. Elena." Elena put her head in her hands and sobbed. All those years of feeling guilty about her identity, about coming into this house, now all of it collapsed and felt light again. She had just lost a bloodline, but had received something greater, unconditional love. When Graham walked in, he saw her sitting there, the letter in her hand, tears falling like rain. He rushed to her side, worried. "Elena, what's wrong?" She handed him the letter. "You should read it." He opened it, reading each line, his eyes changing, first surprise, then silence, and finally a sad but warm smile. He sat down beside her. "Laura always knows things. She knew I would see you, and she believed I needed you." Elena shook her head, her voice trembling. "But you see, things are complicated. I can't be here anymore. I can't replace her." Graham looked at her for a long time. "You were never a replacement. You were you, the one Laura trusted, the one who brought this house back to life." She was silent, then softly said, "I'm afraid people won't understand. They'll say I'm taking advantage of you, or wanting to take something that doesn't belong to me." He placed his hand on hers, his voice calm. "They can say anything, but you know what? The world always judges what they can't understand. I don't need them to understand. I just need you to believe." She looked at him, her eyes red, but shining with something gentle and clear. "Do you really believe that love can start over after everything? Not a new beginning," he said slowly, "but a continuation, like a seed growing where the old tree once stood." Outside, a gentle breeze blew, carrying the scent of young lavender. The sunset shone through the windows, bathing both sides in a pale yellow light. "Mrs." Nora stepped forward and placed her hand on Elena's shoulder. "Lady Laura chose love, not fear. Now it's your turn to do it for her." Elena nodded slightly, tears still falling, but her lips smiled. That night, she went out into the garden alone. It was dark and the wind was gentle. She sat down beside the blooming lavender, put Laura's letter on the ground, and whispered, "Sister, I don't know if I have the courage like you, but I promise I will live as you want me to, with my heart." Behind her, Graham came out and quietly put his coat on her. He said nothing, just sat beside her, looking up at the starry sky. From the ashes, new seeds have sprouted, not just lavender, but love, faith, and forgiveness. It was a quiet autumn morning in Willow Creek. The breeze carried the scent of lavender from the newly planted garden through the glass windows of the office. Graham sat at his desk, facing the central blueprint of Laura's Haven, the project he and Elena were working on together. He held the cup of coffee, his eyes stopping at the corner of the drawing with her handwritten words, "Each room will have a window facing the sun." The words were simple, but they warmed his heart. He never thought that, after so much loss, he could feel so peaceful. There was a knock on the door. "Mrs." Nora entered, holding an envelope with the Dane Media logo on it. Someone brought it, said it was a letter of cooperation. Graham frowned. "Victoria's company." "Yeah, but I feel something is wrong." He opened the letter. Inside was not a proposal for cooperation, but a document and a few printed photos. In the photo, Elena was walking out of a high-rise building in the city, the headquarters of Dane Media. Date taken 3 days before the fire. A bold note below: secret meeting between Elena Carter and Graham Ashford's rival. What is the real relationship? Graham clenched the paper, his eyes darkening. Just then, his phone rang. A message from Victoria appeared. Maybe you should ask her why she met me before your house burned down. Graham stood still. A chill ran down his spine. He didn't trust Victoria, but he also didn't understand why Elena had ever been there. In the evening, when Elena came home, he was still sitting in his office, the yellow light shining on his tense face. "Are you still awake?" she asked, her voice soft as usual. "There's something I need to know," he replied, bluntly. "Have you been to Dane Media?" She paused, clearly not expecting him to know. "Yes, but before the fire." "Yes, but not in the way you think." "What is it?" "Elena?" His voice was low, husky and cold. "You met Victoria Dane, the fake newsmaker, the one who ruined my company, and who may have been involved in the fire." She stepped closer, looking straight at him. "I came to ask her to take down the post that was bad about you and the kids. I didn't tell you because I was afraid you would get angry and things would get worse." Graham was silent. The reasoning made sense, but painful memories flooded his mind of people he trusted turning their backs, lying, betraying him. "Do you have proof?" Elena was stunned. "You don't believe me." He avoided her eye. "I just need the truth." She was silent for a moment, her voice choked. "The truth is, I did the right thing. But maybe you're not ready to trust anyone but yourself." She turned away, tears falling, leaving him in the silent room. That night, Graham did not sleep. He went out on the porch, looked at the starry sky, but his heart was empty. He remembered Laura's words in the letter, "Believe in goodness, even when the world does not believe in you." The next morning, rumors spread across the internet. Elena Carter, the heroic Maid, is actually an insider for Dane Media. Sophisticatedly edited photos, along with ambiguous articles, turned the story into a media tragedy. Elena left the villa that same afternoon. She left a short note. "Don't look for me. I can't stand it when you look at me with suspicious eyes." The children cried all evening. "Mrs." Nora sat holding them, and Graham just stood in the study, looking at the paper for hours. A week passed. The media was still buzzing. Graham barely left the house. He went to the police to continue the investigation into the fire, hoping for new clues, something that could prove Elena innocent. And then, one gloomy afternoon, his phone rang. "The Willow Creek police chief said we found video from a camera near the gas station the night of the fire. You should come see it." As the video played, his heart sank. In the dim light, a woman emerged from a Dane Media vehicle, carrying a can of gasoline. She was wearing a hat, but as the camera panned in, the light fell on her face. Victoria Dane. No further proof is needed. Graham immediately called his assistant. "Cancel all meetings. Get the car ready. I have to go." He drove all night to the small town where Elena lived, Billings, more than 100 miles from Willow Creek. She was working in a small bakery, wearing an apron and her hair tied back. When he walked in, she looked up, and in that moment, everything seemed to stop. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was soft, but clear. "To tell you, I was wrong." He stepped forward, his voice warm but trembling. "I let my past make me doubt the only person who believed in me." Elena was silent. "You know the truth?" He nodded. "Victoria started the fire. She wanted to tear us apart, and I let her succeed." Tears welled up in Elena's eyes. But this time they weren't just sadness. "I'm not angry with you. I just feel sorry. Because when you truly love, the scariest thing isn't losing it, but being doubted." Graham stepped closer, taking her hand. "I know, and I fear that more than losing my life. But if you give me the chance, I want to go back with you, to plant everything again." She looked at him, her eyes wavering. Then she smiled weakly. "And you? Are you sure that later, when another storm comes, you will still believe me?" He replied firmly, "If I don't believe you, I have nothing left to believe in." She laughed through her tears. "You are such a bad liar. I'm telling the truth. And if need be, I'll prove it for the rest of my life." The wind outside was blowing hard, shaking the small sign in front of the bakery. Elena looked out, then back. "Okay, but I didn't come back because of the promise. I came back because I still believe in that house, where Laura, the children, and you are waiting." That evening, they drove back to Willow Creek. When they stopped in front of the villa, the yellow lights of the nearly completed house were shining. "Mrs." Nora was waiting at the door, and the 3 children rushed out like little birds. "Elena is back," Ellie shouted. She knelt down and hugged them tightly, tears mingling with laughter. Graham stood behind, watching the scene, feeling a relief in his chest. In that moment, he understood the greatest challenge of love is not loss or danger, but learning to trust, even when one's heart is still trembling. The first morning after Elena returned, the atmosphere in the villa seemed different. Sunlight filtered through the white curtains, illuminating the walls, which had been repainted cream. Children's laughter echoed throughout the house, a sound Graham had feared he would never hear again. Elena stood in the kitchen, stirring the oatmeal. Nora was peeling an apple beside her, smiling. "You know, this kitchen never smells so good as it does this morning." Elena smiled. "It must be the smell of the landlord's overbrewed coffee." Graham walked in through the door, a cup of coffee in his hand, his eyes gentle. "Strong coffee will help you stay awake. We have a lot of work today." "Are you talking about the opening of the center?" Elena asked, her voice slightly worried. "Yes, everything is ready. But if you feel tired, we can step back." She shook her head. "No, I want to be there. It's what Laura dreamed of, and it's what you promised." He looked at her and nodded slightly. Then together, they took the children to Laura's haven. The land that had once been the western part of the old mansion was now a 2-story white building with lavender along the driveway. A carved wooden sign hung on the gate, "Laura's Haven, a place of hope and new beginnings." The ceremony was small. It was just the people of Willow Creek, a few adopted orphans, and community representatives. But none of them held back tears when Graham spoke. He stood in front of the yard, holding the microphone, his deep voice echoing in the autumn wind. "Today, I did not just open a building. I reopened the door of my heart that I had closed for too long. Someone once taught me that if we sow seeds with love, even in the ashes, life will still sprout. I would like to dedicate this place to Laura, the wife who taught me what love is. And I also want to thank Elena, the one who taught me what faith is." Everyone applauded, the sound of their applause mixed with the wind. Elena bowed her head, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Mrs." Nora stood behind her, gently squeezed her hand, and whispered, "Madame Laura is definitely smiling up there." After the ceremony, they toured the rooms of the center together. Children ran around in the lavender garden, laughing heartily. A curly-haired orphan girl ran up to Elena and hugged her. Auntie, this place is so beautiful. Will you stay here forever? Elena bent down and patted her head. Yes, I will be here. Forever. She looked up, meeting Graham's eyes. Between them, no words were needed, just understanding. In the afternoon, when the guests had gone, it was just them and the gentle breeze. Elena walked down the hallway, where pictures of Laura hung from youth to motherhood. Under each picture was a quote from her. One photo made Elena pause longer than the others. Love doesn't end when we lose someone. It just changes form, so we can continue living. Elena gently touched the photo frame and whispered, "Sister, I finally understand what you mean." Behind him, Graham approached and stood beside him. He looked at the photo and said softly, "She always believed in the good. And now, I believe too." Elena turned.
Believe in what? Believe that the human heart, no matter how wounded, can still love again. She smiled, but there were tears in her eyes. And what if I get hurt again? Then we continue to love. Because if we stop, we will no longer be truly alive.
That answer left Elena speechless. She realized that the man who had once been cold, who had built walls around himself, now spoke with the voice of someone who understood loss and forgave. The children ran up and pulled them both out into the garden. "Daddy, Elena, come and see outside." The afternoon sun was shining brightly. In the lavender bed, the first flower had bloomed pale purple, soft as silk. Graham knelt down beside the children and whispered, "It's the tree we replanted after the fire." Elena stood watching, her heart filled with an indescribable feeling, both peace and deep happiness. Graham raised his head, his eyes meeting hers. "You know," he said softly, "there were times when I thought I had lost everything. But it turns out that sometimes God doesn't take away something precious, but just hides it temporarily, so we can learn to appreciate it when we find it again." "And what if it takes too long to find it again?" Elena replied, her voice trembling. "As long as they keep walking towards the light." He smiled, taking her hand, "Like you." A gentle breeze blew. The lavender petals swayed, releasing a sweet scent. Children played around them, their laughter echoing in the wind. As the sun set, the garden was bathed in a golden glow. Elena looked up at the sky and smiled. "Laura, I think you'll like it here." "I'm sure of it," Graham replied softly. They stood side by side, no more words needed. The dawn of faith had truly come, without noise, without violence, only the gentleness of people who had lost everything, and now knew how to hold on to what mattered most. Above, the sky was clear. A gentle breeze blew, carrying the scent of lavender like a greeting from a deceased person. In that moment, Elena gently closed her eyes, feeling something warm and peaceful touch the depths of her heart. No more fear, no more inferiority complex, only faith. A simple faith, but enough to make a person, after many storms, still dare to smile and start again. The early winter morning in Willow Creek was colder than usual. The ground was covered with a thin white mist like a veil. The children were chattering away, getting ready for kindergarten. Elena wrapped scarves around each one, kissed their foreheads, then turned to see Graham putting on his coat and heading out. "Are you going to the center?" "Yes." "Today, there is a group from the community fund coming to survey, but I will come back to have lunch with you and Mrs. Nora." Elena nodded, smiling warmly. Since everything had passed, they seemed to have quietly entered a new rhythm of life, no longer heavy, but not ostentatious either. Just simple, peaceful things. After everyone left, Elena started cleaning the attic. It had been abandoned since Laura died. She wanted to tidy it up, to make it a memory corner, a place that belonged to both the past and the present. The attic still smelled of old wood. Light filtered through the small window, picking up tiny dust particles. Elena dusted and sorted through the old boxes. As she moved a small wooden chest with a lock, she noticed something roll out from inside a linen-wrapped package tied with brown string. With a familiar handwriting on the outside, unsent letters. Elena stopped. Her heart was pounding. She gently untied the knot. Inside were about 10 letters, each addressed to a different person. Graham, Ellie, Sam, June, Elena. Her hand shook as she pulled out the first letter. Graham's name. Dear Graham, if you are reading this, it means I no longer have a chance to apologize. I knew I didn't have much time left, but I was afraid you wouldn't forgive me for hiding it from you, adopting Elena as my sister. I didn't want you to think I pitied her. I just couldn't bear the thought of someone like Elena, who had been abandoned, living alone. You may not believe it, but when I see you two together, I see something I once had, faith and life. If one day you find that again with her, please don't feel guilty. It's not betrayal. It's a continuation of the love I left behind. Elena folded the letter, tears streaming down her face. She put it aside, then opened the second letter, with her name on it. Dear Elena, you may never read these words, but if they ever do reach you, I want you to know you are worthy of love. All your life you thought you were the one who came after, the one who was given. But you are not. You are the one God sent to mend the broken hearts of others, including mine. When you cared for the children, I saw a light in their eyes, something I worried would disappear after I was gone. If Graham sees that light, and if his heart responds, please do not be afraid, because when you heal each other, I am at peace too. Elena covered her mouth with her hand. Tears kept falling. She felt like Laura was sitting somewhere in this attic, looking at her, smiling. She sat silently for a long time, reading each letter until the light outside the window turned a pale yellow. Each letter was a piece of Laura's soul, not a warning, but a piece of real emotion, fear, gratitude, and hope sent to those left behind. That afternoon, when Graham returned home, he found Elena sitting on the couch, a stack of neatly folded letters beside her. She looked up, her eyes still wet with tears. You should read this, she said, pushing the stack of letters toward him. Graham sat down and opened the first letter. When he reached the part where Laura wrote, "If I ever find it again with her," he paused. His hands clenched. His lips trembled slightly. "She's always one step ahead," he said softly. She knew this would happen. Elena nodded, and she accepted it with love, not fear. He looked at her. Do you find it hard to forgive her for keeping the adoption from you? She shook her head slightly. No, I just regret not being able to tell you how grateful I am. They were silent for a long time. In that silence, there was only the sound of the wind blowing through the window and the children's laughter in the yard below. I think, Graham said slowly, Laura left us not just a memory, but a lesson. That true love doesn't stop with loss. It continues through the people we leave behind. Elena nodded, smiling through her tears. I think she knew, when she wrote these letters, that we would read them together, just like she wanted to be between us, not to separate us, but to connect us. Graham took her hands and squeezed them. I'll keep them, not to hide them, but to remind myself every day that love has no fixed form. It changes, but it doesn't disappear. That night, they put the letters together in a small box, which they placed on a shelf in the family library. At the bottom of the box, Elena carved a small line in pencil. Love, even if not sent, always finds its way. Graham stood behind her, put his hand on her shoulder, and said in a deep voice, "You know, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't have had the courage to read these letters." She turned back, her eyes shining in the candlelight. "If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have had the courage to open them." Outside, the wind carried a faint scent of lavender, blending with the twinkling lights from the courtyard. The house was no longer a place of sadness, but a place to keep all that remained of love. At night, when everyone was asleep, Elena stepped out onto the porch. Thousands of stars twinkled in the sky. She looked up and smiled softly. "Thank you, Laura. Thank you for believing in the good." Graham put his arms around her from behind. They stood in the quiet space, listening to the wind and their breathing. A chapter closed, not with tears, but with gratitude. And in the silence of Willow Creek, love, though never sent, is still quietly blooming one February morning. As snow lay thick around the lavender fields, Graham received a call from New York. On the other end of the line was Thomas Hale, who had been his close advisor. "Graham, I hate to bother you right now, but the company is in serious trouble. The board is about to vote on control. If you don't come back soon, you'll lose everything." Graham was silent. He had been away from the business world for more than a year, operating remotely, spending time with his family in Laura's Haven, but the news was too much to ignore. He took a deep breath. "I'll be there in 3 days." When he hung up, Elena was standing in the doorway, holding a cup of tea. She looked at him, her eyes worried. "What happened?" He told her briefly. She was silent for a few seconds, then said, "I have to go." He was surprised. "You're not angry. You know I hate that world." "I know, but it's still a part of you. Graham, you can't hide from it forever. You have to face it, to be truly free." He looked at her for a long time, then took her hand. "I'm scared, Elena, scared that if I go back there, I'll become the same person again, cold, lonely, and not knowing who to trust." She smiled gently. "That is why you need to carry this belief with you. Wherever you are, don't forget where you belong." 3 days later, Graham left Willow Creek. The children waved goodbye. Nora stood silently on the steps, and Elena said only one sentence: "I will keep this house warm, waiting for you." In all, New York greeted him with a cold wind. The city was noisy, bright, and full of hurried faces. Everything was so different from Willow Creek, where just hearing children's laughter brought peace. At the corporate headquarters, Graham entered the conference room where Thomas and the board members were waiting. The atmosphere was heavy. On the big screen, the report numbers were glowing red. "The Phoenix Resort investment cost us almost $200 million, Thomas said. "The shareholders want someone new to run it. They say you've been out too long." Graham was silent, his eyes following the chart. "Who is nominating for me Richard Drake?" Thomas replied. "The man who worked for you. Now heads the new group of shareholders." The name sent a chill down Graham's spine. Drake, the last name of Camille Drake, his ex-fiancée, the woman who had lied and betrayed him years ago. He stood up, his voice low. "I will not let history repeat itself." Meanwhile, in Willow Creek, the snow melted and the sky grew dark. Elena continued to work at Laura's Haven. In the evenings, she told stories to the children and wrote to Graham every day, even though she knew he was busy. "Graham, it snowed again today." And Ellie said it was a message from the angels. If so, I must have sent you a storm. I don't know what it's like over there, but here, everything's fine. Nora still reminds you of it at dinner time, and the kids still compete to see who can remember your voice the most. I just hope you remember you're not fighting alone. She folded the letter and placed it in a wooden box beside her bed, along with Laura's unsent letters. In New York, the battle to regain the company was tense. Graham was opposed, questioned about his ability, about being controlled by a woman, a reference to Elena. A shareholder shouted Ashford, "You have turned from a businessman to a dreamer. Do you still want to use the charity center to prove your humanity?" The room laughed. Graham stood up, his eyes sharp. "If humanity makes you weak, then you have never been strong. I will not give up my values to hold on to power, but I will fight for them." He pulled out a stack of documents. The Phoenix Project collapsed because Drake illegally diverted funds to his own funds. Here's the proof. The room was silent. Thomas smiled slightly. "You are still the Graham Ashford I knew, but a more righteous version." 3 days later, the board voted. The result, Graham kept his position. Drake was fired. When he was done, he left the building and looked out at the gray Manhattan sky. Snow was falling lightly. He opened his phone, 12 unread emails from Elena. He read each one, feeling warm in the middle of a snowstorm. One last message. "If you're done, come back before spring comes. The children say the lavender only blooms when you're here." He smiled. 3 days later, Graham returned to Willow Creek. As he turned onto the driveway, he saw smoke rising from the garden, not fire, but steam. Elena and the children were burning dry twigs for warmth. Elena looked up at him, paused for a few seconds, then smiled brightly. The children cheered and ran out. Daddy's home. He knelt down and hugged all 3 of them. The feeling, the warmth, the laughter, the lingering scent of lavender made all his fatigue melt away. Elena stood a few steps away, her eyes filled with tears. "You're back." He approached, held her hand, and said in a warm voice, "I have given you everything. Not money, but trust." She smiled. "I never doubted that." He looked deep into her eyes and said softly, "Now I understand why Laura believed in you. You not only saved the children, but you saved me too. I have lived a life chasing power, but only when I lost everything did I find something worth keeping, my family." Elena replied softly, "No one is truly strong until they learn to love. And you learned that." They stood in the middle of a lavender garden, sleeping under a layer of snow, hand in hand, like 2 people who had just walked through the last storm of their lives. In the distance, the early spring afternoon sun began to shine. On the roofs, snow melted into sparkling drops of water. A new chapter was about to unfold, no longer one of war or loss, but of peace and faith. Elena looked up at the sky and whispered, "The storm is over. Laura, we saved this house." And in that moment, amidst the wind and the light, it seemed as if someone was smiling faintly from afar. Spring in Willow Creek comes later than usual, but as the first rays of sunlight break through the gray clouds, the lavender garden begins to magically come to life. The purple flowers stretch out, swaying in the gentle breeze, filling the air with a sweet scent. Elena woke early that morning. She opened the window and inhaled the sweet scent of earth and flowers. Outside, the laughter of children rang out. Ellie was chasing Sam, and June was trying to stick a sprig of lavender in the hair of a rag doll. She looked at the scene, a rare sense of peace rising in her heart. From the kitchen, the smell of roasting coffee wafted, a familiar aroma that signaled Graham was awake. He walked into the room, his white shirt sleeves rolled up, his hair still slightly damp. "You're up early," he said, his voice as light as the morning breeze. "I want to see the lavender," Elena replied, her smile flickering like sunlight on water. He looked out, his eyes slightly pensive. "This time last year, we were still clearing the ashes." "Yes," she said softly, "but this year, we are replanting memories." Graham approached, setting his coffee cup down on the table. "I was thinking." "About what?" "About having a small ceremony in the center, to mark the first lavender season after everything came back to life." Elena looked at him, her eyes lighting up. "A lavender festival at Willow Creek." "That sounds great. We could donate to the mountain children and have people plant more trees in the center." "Good idea." He nodded. "You be the one in charge." She smiled, tilting her head slightly. "Aren't you afraid I'll make a big deal out of it? I trust you," he replied simply. Those two words made Elena smile, not out of surprise, but because now she knew he was telling the truth. A week later, the official Lavender Festival was held at Laura's Haven. The whole town of Willow Creek was bustling like never before. People brought pies, preserves, honey juice, purple ribbons fluttered in the wind. Elena wore a simple white dress and a small key necklace, a gift from Graham. Mrs. Nora was in charge of the apple pie stall, and the children ran around the garden, laughing heartily. Graham stood still for a moment, looking at the scene before him. People who had once doubted him, now laughing, talking, sharing, planting trees. He felt something in his heart blossom, like those lavender branches. In the afternoon, when the sun had softened, Elena stepped onto the small wooden platform in the middle of the garden, holding a microphone. Her voice was soft but clear. "Not long ago, this place was just a piece of burnt land and ashes, but today it has become a garden of life, perhaps in our lives. Everyone has gone through fire at least once. The important thing is not whether we are burned or not, but whether we dare to replant or not. Laura's Haven is proof that, when we choose love over fear, miracles will return." The whole garden was silent for a few seconds. Then there was thunderous applause. Many people wiped away tears. Graham stepped forward, took her hand, and whispered, "Laura would be proud of you." Elena looked at him, her smile wide. "I think she's standing somewhere among these flowers." He nodded. "Maybe so." No. When the festival ended, the sky was a deep purple with dusk. The people had gone home, and only they and Mrs. Nora were left to clean up. "I have never seen this place so beautiful," she whispered. Graham smiled. "It's nice to have people who forgive, isn't it, Mrs.?" Nora nodded, her eyes shining. "Because there are people who love again, my dear." She left, leaving the two of them in the middle of the garden. The lavender swayed in the wind, its fragrance seeming to embrace everything. Graham looked at Elena and said softly, "You know, I used to think love was only for once in a lifetime, but now I understand. There are loves that are passed on to others to continue." Elena replied, her voice as light as the wind, like a fire passed from hand to hand. No one takes it away, only makes it brighter. He smiled and moved closer. "I don't know what the future holds, But if I can, I want to take care of this garden with you and watch the lavender bloom with the children every year." She looked at him for a long time, her eyes shining like a candle in the wind. "Me too." They were silent. Only the sound of insects, the wind, and the scent of lavender wafted around them. Suddenly, June ran out of the house, holding a watercolor doodle. "Daddy, Elena." I finished. Graham bent down and looked at the small picture. It showed a white house, a garden of purple lavender, and a brown-haired woman holding 3 children. In the sky was a bright circle, like the sun. "It's beautiful," Elena said, moved. "What did you draw?" June innocently said. "I drew my family. And the other circle is Laura. She is in the sky, looking at us." The words stunned them both. Elena bent down and hugged June, tears falling silently. Graham looked at the painting, then smiled slightly, the smile of someone who had finally learned to make peace with the past. "Thank you, June," he said softly. "Mother Laura will be very happy to see us here." The girl nodded and ran away. Graham turned to Elena, his voice warm. "Maybe we just got blessed." Elena smiled through her tears. "I think so. And I believe, next lavender season, we will see it blooming again, like today." He squeezed her hand. Not just flowers, but hearts. Dusk fell over the garden. The sky was red, as if dyed purple with lavender. High above, a flock of birds flew south, their cries echoing in the quiet space. The scene was so peaceful that, in that moment, they both felt Laura was between them, not in memory, but in the very breath of the season. Lavender still blooms, faith is still green, and love, through all the storms, remains. That night, the full moon hung like a silver mirror in the sky. Willow Creek was bathed in a soft light, covering the lavender beds with a thin layer of glitter like dew. In the cabin, the 3 children were sleeping soundly after a long day of play. Ellie hugged her doll tightly. Sam curled up, and June was still smiling in her sleep. Nora gently closed the door, saw Elena sitting on the porch, and said softly, "Miss Elena, go outside. Mr. Graham is waiting in the garden." Elena looked up, slightly surprised. "Waiting for me?" "Yes." "Mrs." Nora smiled kindly. "He said he had something important to say tonight." Elena nodded slightly. She put on a thin sweater and stepped outside. The moon shone brightly over the garden. The lavender flowers rustled in the wind, exuding a strong fragrance. In the middle of the garden stood Graham, in a white shirt, holding an old guitar. Behind him was a small table with 2 glasses of wine and a few lit candles. "What are you doing?" Elena asked, half laughing, half curious. Graham turned back, his eyes sparkling in the moonlight. "I owe you a peaceful evening, long ago." She stepped closer. "I thought you didn't know how to play guitar." "I used to play, before things got too loud. I thought it was time to find the sound I'd forgotten." He sat down on a wooden chair and gently strummed a few chords. The sound of the guitar echoed in the quiet space, warm, deep, and slightly hoarse like his voice. Elena listened quietly. When the music stopped, he looked at her, his eyes so sincere that her heart almost skipped a beat. "Elena," he said slowly, "I thought my life ended the day Laura left. I lived without feeling alive. I worked, earned money, but it didn't mean anything anymore. Then you came, not to replace me, but to remind me that love doesn't disappear. It just changes form. You taught me how to talk to children from the heart, how to believe in tenderness. And today, I just want to say thank you for staying." Elena bowed her head, her eyes brimming with tears. "I just did what I had to do. Graham, I was scared too. Scared of being misunderstood. Scared of coming into your life wrong. But then I realized, sometimes God puts you in the right place at the right time, to mend what's broken. He stood up and walked closer. I don't just want to thank you. I want to promise. What promise? I don't know how to say it in flowery words, but I want you to know. I will never leave you alone. I will not miss another moment. No matter how crazy life gets, I will come back to this place, to you, to this family. His voice choked on the last words. Elena looked at him, her lips trembling slightly. Are you serious? Nothing I have ever said is more true. A gentle breeze blew by, making the lavender petals sway in unison. The moonlight reflected in their eyes, sparkling like 1,000 tiny stars. Elena was silent for a moment, then said softly, I also have a promise. He looked at her, waiting. I promise I won't run away anymore. I used to think I was just a passerby in your life, but now I know. It was you and the kids who made me find myself. If love is a home, then you are the one who gave me a roof to stay under. So no matter what happens tomorrow, I will still be here with you, with the kids, and with this place. Graham smiled, his eyes shining like moonlight on water. I believe you. She replied softly. I believe you too. They stood in the middle of the lavender garden, the distance between them gradually narrowing. No words were needed, just breathing and understanding. When their lips touched, the wind seemed to stop, and time seemed to stand still. It was not a kiss of passion, but a promise spoken from the heart, gentle, deep, and sacred. After a moment, Graham gently tugged her hand, leading her to a small table. I have something for you. He took a small wooden box from his pocket. Inside was a silver ring engraved with 3 interlocking lavender petals. Elena took a small breath. Graham, not a proposal, not yet, he said, his voice warm as velvet. Just a promise. The 3 petals represent the past, the present, and the future. I can't change the past, but I can make the present beautiful enough to make the future worth waiting for. She held the ring, her finger trembling slightly. I never thought someone would make me a promise like that. You deserve it, he replied, because you have lived with all your heart. Elena put the ring on her finger, the silver reflecting the moonlight. She looked up at him. I have never seen the moon so beautiful. Maybe because you're looking with peaceful eyes, he said. She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. They sat still, listening to the wind through the lavender, the night insects, and their heartbeats synchronizing. The moon seemed brighter above. The small candles flickered around the table in a dance of light. I think Laura is smiling, Elena said softly. Graham nodded. I think so too. She would have wanted us to live like this, no worries, no regrets, just love and trust. She smiled slightly. And thank you? Yes. And thanks. The two sat like that for a long time, until the moonlight slid over the distant mountains, and the sky began to change color. In the silence of that night, there were promises made without pen and paper. There were wounds closed not by medicine, but by a gentle handshake between 2 people who had lost each other in the darkness. And there were beginnings written, not by plans, but by simple love. The night passed, but the promise still shone, like the moonlight imprinted on each lavender petal. The next morning, the first rays of summer sunlight shone through the bedroom window. The gentle rays slid through the white curtains, shining on Elena's face. She opened her eyes slightly, feeling the warmth of the new day. Beside her, Graham was still sleeping peacefully, his arm around her, his breathing steady and peaceful, like the waves on a lake. Elena lay quietly for a few minutes, listening to the birds chirping in the garden. She smiled, her heart as light as the lavender outside. Since coming to this house, she had experienced so many emotions: fear, hurt, hope, and finally love. Now, all that remained was stillness, as if the storm had passed. Graham turned slightly and opened his eyes. He saw her smiling and said in a hoarse morning voice, "Good morning, Elena." "Good morning, Graham," she replied softly. "It's a beautiful day." He looked out the window. The golden sunlight stretched across the fields. "Yes, today is a special day." "Special." He nodded. "The grand opening of Laura's Haven. We'll be welcoming the first children to live there." Elena nodded slightly, feeling her heart beat faster. "I still can't believe it went this far. From a desolate area to a home for abandoned children. Thanks to you," Graham said, taking her hand. "Without you, this place would be just cold bricks. You make it a home." Elena looked at him and shook her head slightly. "No, Graham, we do it together. I plant the seed. You help it grow." He smiled. "Maybe that's why the lavender is blooming so well this year." At noon, the sky over Willow Creek was clear, with white clouds drifting lazily. In front of the center of Laura's Haven, people gathered in large numbers. The words "Welcome Home" hung on the wooden gate, fluttering in the wind. The triplets ran around laughing, carrying purple balloons. Nora busied herself setting the table, and Elena checked the guest list. Graham stood on the porch and looked around. The sight moved him more than any meeting he had ever seen. He remembered the first days when the house was still and cold, with only the wind howling and Laura's picture hanging in the fireplace. And now it rang with laughter, the smell of baking bread, birdsong, and flowers. As the church bells rang in the distance, the ceremony began. Elena stepped onto the wooden platform, her voice steady and warm. "A year ago, all we had was faith and unhealed wounds. But today, we have a real home, not just made of wood, but of heart. Laura's Haven is not just for children who need a place to live, but for all hearts who need healing. We cannot change the past, but we can give hope for tomorrow." The applause was loud and long. A few people wiped away tears. Graham stood below, his eyes shining, proud, loving, and grateful. He stepped forward and said briefly, "I used to think I could control everything with money and reason. But I was wrong. Only when I learned to love did I understand what true strength was. I want to thank Elena, who brought light back to this place, and thank everyone for believing that good things still exist." No one said anything, but several people smiled. The sunlight fell on his face, warm as if Laura were smiling too, somewhere above. In the evening, when everyone had gone home, the house was quiet again. On the table was a bouquet of fresh lavender. The children were fast asleep. "Mrs." Nora cleaned up the last few glasses, then looked at Elena. "I have never seen Mr. Graham so happy." Elena smiled. He found himself again. "No, you're the one who helped him do that." "Mrs.," Nora said, then touched her shoulder gently. "Now let yourself be happy. Elena." Elena looked at her eyes glistening with tears. "Yes, ma'am. When Mrs." Nora was gone. Graham came in with 2 glasses of wine in his hands. "I think we should celebrate today." She smiled, taking the glass. "For today, and for tomorrow. He clinked glasses with hers. To our tomorrow. They sat down on the porch. The summer night was quiet, except for the sound of insects and the wind blowing through the lavender fields. The stars were shining brightly, like a blanket of light covering the world. Elena said softly, "You know, when I was little, I used to wish to live in a place where there was the scent of lavender all year round, because I thought there would be no war, no loneliness." Graham looked at her, his voice low. "And now you are there." She nodded. "Yes, I am here, where there is love, memory, and hope." He took her hand and smiled, "And I found my home." They sat silently, looking at the stars. The wind carried the scent of flowers, sweet and pleasant. Elena leaned her head on his shoulder, her voice as small as a breath. "Mr. Graham, what do you think Laura would say if she saw us now?" He was silent for a moment, then said softly, "I think she would say thank you, Elena, for helping me keep my promise." She smiled, her eyes sparkling. "I don't know what the future holds, but I believe that if we live honestly, tomorrow is always worth waiting for." Graham leaned over and kissed her forehead. "I believe so." In the distance the church clock sounded, 12 long strokes. The night was deep, but the air was no longer cold. Elena closed her eyes, feeling his hand in hers, warm and strong. In that moment, she understood that life sometimes doesn't need a brilliant ending. It just needs a place to return to, someone to hold hands with, and a belief to continue together. Tomorrow would come, bringing with it both sunshine and rain, both challenges and joys. But they would not fear, for they had each other and this home, where lavender would always bloom, no matter what season it was. Above, the sky opened. Below, a small house in the valley lit up, and in the middle of it all, 3 children, a man, and a woman. People who had once been lost, but now found their way. No need for farewells, no need for a closing song, because in fact, happiness is not a stopping point, but a journey to continue together. Autumn came to Willow Creek again, gently and slowly, as if afraid to awaken memories. The maple trees along the driveway were yellow, and the wind blew through them like a whisper of time. One afternoon, as the sun was fading, Elena was tidying up the bookcase in the living room when she found an old wooden box. She wiped a thin layer of dust from the lid and opened it. Inside were letters tied neatly with blue ribbon. The paper had turned yellow. The first envelope was written in a familiar handwriting, "To Graham, if one day you need to find faith again." Elena froze. It was Laura's handwriting. She sat down, feeling both nervous and sad. She hesitated for a moment, then decided to take the mailbox out onto the porch where Graham was sitting with the children. "Graham," she called softly, "I found this in the closet." He turned. When he saw the wooden box, his eyes widened. He took it, his hand shaking slightly. "I thought it was lost." Elena looked at him and said in a small voice, "Do you want to read alone?" He was silent for a moment, then shook his head slightly. "No, you should stay here." They sat down on the porch steps, where the afternoon sunlight cast a golden glow over the fading lavender. A gentle breeze blew, and the scent of dried flowers mingled with the scent of old wood. Graham opened the first letter. His voice was low but steady. "Dear Graham, if you read this letter, I may not be with you any more. I know you will be in pain, but please do not close your heart. I once saw a light in your eyes, the light of someone who knows how to love, trust, and care for others. Don't let the pain kill that light. Live, love, and smile, because I will always be here in those smiles. Graham stopped reading, his voice hoarse. Elena gently took his hand, saying nothing. He took a deep breath and continued to open the second letter. If one day you meet someone who makes you feel at peace, don't be afraid. Peace is not forgetting, but a sign that I have helped you come this far. Let her love you, the way I did. And if she loves the children, that is the miracle I pray to God for every night. A tear fell onto the page. Elena couldn't help but wipe it away. But Graham caught her hand. Don't. Just let it sink in. She'll understand. The two were silent for a long time. The wind blew the maple leaves down, lightly touching the wooden porch. The children were still playing in the distance, their laughter echoing like the music of life. Elena whispered, "Laura is a strong woman." Graham nodded. She always thought of others first. I never understood that. Until I met you. She smiled, a small, sad smile. Maybe she knew that one day you would need someone to remind you that the world is still gentle. He looked at her, his voice trembling slightly. You already did it. Elena. She didn't answer, just leaned her head on his shoulder. The last rays of sunlight touched her hair, making it shine like gold. After reading all the letters, Graham carefully placed them back in the box and closed the lid. I'll leave them here, not to forget, but to remember that love comes in many forms, and every person who passes through our lives leaves a piece of light. Elena placed her hand on the lid of the box. The light never goes out. It just changes direction. He looked at her, his eyes warm as the sunset. I think Laura will like you. She chuckled. I think so. If she could, she would probably make me a cup of tea and say, thanks for making him smile back. They smiled together. A smile without sadness. Only the affection of those who know how to cherish the present. Night fell. The children were fast asleep. Elena went out into the garden and saw Graham standing under the maple tree where Laura had planted it. He looked up at the starry sky, his eyes distant. She came over and asked softly, What are you thinking about? I was thinking. He replied, his voice low, that if Laura were here, maybe she would say I did the right thing. Right for what? Because I didn't choose to live in the past. I chose to move on, and I'm grateful to you because you made that possible. Elena looked at him, her voice gentle. Sometimes, we don't need to forget to be forgiven. We just need to love again. He turned, his eyes as deep as the autumn night. I love you, Elena. She replied softly but firmly. I know, and I love you too. Without another word. They hugged each other in silence. In the distance, the sound of falling leaves and insects mixed with the wind, like a lullaby of heaven and earth. When they left the garden, the moon had just risen. Silver light bathed the porch, the lavender beds, now bare but still fragrant. Elena turned to see the mailbox on the table still reflecting the faint moonlight. Thank you, Laura, she whispered. A gentle breeze blew by, carrying with it the faint scent of lavender, like a reply from a faraway place. The next morning, Graham woke up early. He wrote a few short notes, then put the paper in the same mailbox. Laura, thank you for loving me enough to teach me how to love others. I kept my promise. The lavender still blooms. The children still laugh. And your light is still here, in every breath of this house. Love you, Graham. He closed the box and placed it in the cupboard, next to Laura's framed photograph and the children's picture. When he left the room, The morning light shone through the glass window, casting a small glow on the box, warm, clear, and gentle as the breath of dawn. Out on the porch, Elena was watering the lavender. She turned and smiled. He walked over, put his arm around her waist, and together they looked out at the rising sun. A new day begins. Another chapter of their lives begins. No longer a story of loss, but of people learning to love and forgive. And in the gentle breeze, the scent of lavender spreads throughout the space, like the greetings of letters that were never sent, but arrived at the right place, the human heart. Some wounds don't need time to heal. They need a gentle touch. Graham learned that when he stopped running from the pain and began to look at it with a grateful heart. His and Elena's story isn't just about love. It's about forgiveness, trust, and finding ourselves again after loss. It reminds us that no matter who you are, rich or poor, sometimes the most precious thing isn't what you own. It's who's sitting next to you at night. If you are feeling tired today, if life makes you doubt kindness or love, remember there is always someone, somewhere, silently believing in you. If you just open your heart, happiness will find its way back. Thank you for accompanying Frontier Hearts to the end of this journey. If the story touches your heart, please press like, share with those who need a little hope, and subscribe to Frontier Hearts so you don't miss out on the heartwarming stories where we believe together love, even late, is enough to heal.